Welcome back to The Left Thinker. I'm Ryan Cooper.
And I'm Alexi the Greek, and we have a real banger for you today. A friend of the pod, Pete Davis, is coming to talk about his new documentary that he made with his sister. How cool is that? Join or Die. And this is actually not about violent revolution as much as we might want it to be. It is a great documentary about Robert Putnam in part and his famous book and scholarly study Bowling Alone, but also just more generally, it's a documentary about civic associations and their importance to democracy. And, you know, in our discussion, you'll see to the left and the cause for justice and inculcating freedom and human flourishing. He's a friend of the pod, so you probably all know him, but he has a great book that we talked about before called Dedicated, the Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. I mean, you might recall, Ryan, the kind of long haulers who have these projects over many years that they're involved with. So this is like a related project, this film. And Pete also, you know, you might know him from the Rabbit Hole podcast. Previously, he was on Current Affairs as well. He's just a great guy, really smart, and I think you're going to like this discussion. It dives into a lot of interesting, political science, sociology, and just, relevant life lessons for our flourishing and happiness, and our understanding that the individual misery or happiness that we experience is bound up with not just our political institutions, but the extent to which we actually have community, the extent to which we actually have these different associations that we're a part of and that we respond to and are shaped by.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the interesting thing about the movie from a political standpoint is how you have so many different people across the political spectrum who are interested in the argument. You have a union organizer, you have David Brooks, you have Hillary Clinton, you have Pete Buttigieg, and
Glenn Lowry, if I said his name right.
Glenn Lowry, yeah, a famous black conservative academic. And yet I think that, ultimately it redounds to not exactly, I wouldn't say socialism or the left per se, but it redounds towards democracy, to say that, what we need is a thicker set of social infrastructure and like people who are actually interacting with each other on a regular basis. And, it's not going to automatically produce the revolution per se, but it might militate against something like, January 6th or, like Donald Trump.
It both explains in many ways the evils or diseases of the body politic that are often, epitomized in a symptom like January 6th. Or in the success of Donald Trump. But it also diagnostically offers a treatment and shows what a healthy body politic looks like and what that requires. And democracy, power to the people, rule by the people, is not just, it can't just be formal positions of political power. And it has to mean that we, the people, are involved relationally with each other and in the day-to-day shaping of each other and who we are and who we care about and what we care about and what we're doing about the state of things. And so there's a history lesson here, but there's also a theoretical insight here. And I think there's a lot to learn from this conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just also a good watch. So, I recommend, I sat down and be like, okay, I got to do my podcast prep. And then I was glued to the TV for the computer screen.
It's really well done aesthetically. It's just, it's engaging. I liked even just like the design of the kind of, images that were pulled together in addition to the cinematography. And both Bob Putnam and Pete are just lovely people.
Yeah. Nice folks. And so, without any more delay, let's get to our interview with Pete Davis. After I tell you about our sponsorship with the American Prospect. So if you subscribe at the $10 a month tier, you'll get a free digital subscription to the website. Subscribe at $5 a month, you'll get all of our bonus episodes, which you also get at $10 a month, of course. Otherwise, you can like, subscribe, send to your friends. But
wait. I'll say, because of the guest and the topic, as much as all the people listening are already you are part of the Left Anchor community, especially if you're a regular listener. If you become a patron, you're even more part of the Left Anchor community. And you have another way. Is it embarrassing for me to use that? It's true, though. It's true. And then you have another way to interact with us, email us, DM us. And no, we appreciate you, whatever level of participation in this community you have. So
absolutely. So let's get into our interview with Pete Davis right now. Pete Davis, welcome back to the program. Returning guest,
friend of the pod.
We're so glad to be here. Two-timer.
Yeah, we're now. We'll get into it later, but we're one step in terms of meeting away from Pete Buttigieg and Hillary Clinton now. So our social capital has leveled up, baby.
One degree of separation. I love it.
No, so you've made this film. I watched it this afternoon. The film,
Join or Die.
Again, it's called Join or Die. My first question to you, is that an intentional reference to the famous Revolutionary War flag?
It is a reference to that. I feel a little strange about it. In its vulgar understanding of it, of people saying the states need to come together to fight the revolution, that is what it is in reference to. But there is a darker, French and Indian War Join or Die flag that I don't want to be in reference to. But I'll take the more popular version of that. And our message that we're trying to say is kind of taking the word join and playing around with it around joining clubs instead of just joining the revolution.
Yeah, so to start us off here, it's partly a history of clubs. It's partly about a fella named Bob Putnam. But I think that initially what will be interesting to viewers is a history of what used to be an incredibly common experience, which is joining all these various associations. The Elks Lodge, the Kiwanis Club, the Rotarians, all of these weird little societies that for most people, I think most Americans nowadays, that is not a part of their lives. And it used to be sort of incredibly common. People would join, they would be in 3 or 4 or 5 of these things, and it would be a major part of how you lived your life. And so tell us about that history to sort of lay the groundwork.
Yeah, my sister and I, we made this film together, and, we often talked about that this film is styled after the Lorax, in that, in the original Lorax by Dr. Seuss, this kid goes and talks to this old man in a tower, and he says, there used to be truffula trees in this country. And let me tell you about the truffula trees. It was really amazing. And then the truffula trees disappeared. And in some ways, that is what this is, us, I'm a millennial, and Gen Z even more so. We are the first generation that is losing the cultural memory. So boomers basically would remember that their parents were part of these clubs. They are part of the clubs less so. And we are the first that will totally forget that this was part of American culture. And, there's this nostalgic feeling that we used to be more communal. We used to know our neighbors more. We used to have dinner parties more and picnics more and be part of these clubs. And what we focus on is this one researcher, Robert Putnam, who wrote this famous book, Bowling Alone, where he actually found the data and, in multiple ways, not just one data set. He found it through time diary entries. The Census Bureau Bureau has been keeping time diary entries, and we literally spent more hours during the week at club meetings. We have ad companies that did market research, and they literally asked people, how many times have you been to a club meeting? It was double 50 years ago. We have Roper public opinion polls where people were asked, were you a leader of a club? Have you been to a town meeting? Have you been to a dinner party? Have you been to a picnic? It's usually, roughly about, these all average to about double 50 years ago. And, the moment we're saying, what we're trying to say with this, and what Bob tries to say with his research, is this is civic infrastructure. This isn't just like a interesting cultural change that we used to, dance disco and now we don't anymore. It is a major part of our democracy. It's a major part of governments functioning well. It's a major part of our health. And, for lefties who, like me, who care about this, it's a major part of social movements. It's, if you read the beginning of Stride Toward Freedom, Martin Luther King's memoir of the Montgomery bus boycott, the first chapter is just a list of all the clubs that participated in the bus boycott. And we use clubs in a broad sense to include these, Kiwanis and Rotary, but also unions and congregations and any ways that people get together. Black Panthers are a club, in our sense of what clubs are. That's what the story is. It's basically, there's been a decline, and this is very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And go ahead, Ryan.
Well, one more framing question. I've never read Bowling Alone. I may pick it up now that we've that I've watched this show. He seems like a nice gentleman.
I teach it,
but it's so a lot of it has to do with Italy, right? I didn't know this. He has research in Italy that it's about. It's like the quality of governance, sort of as he defines it, versus like what is associated with that, and he looked into a bunch of stuff. And can you explain his argument about Italy?
Yeah.
Because I had never heard of that before, and it was quite interesting.
Yeah, this is Bob is famous for Bowling Alone in America. That was like his viral moment where he had his 15 minutes of everyone talking about it in the newspapers in the late 90s. But there's this among academics, like among political scientists. He was academically famous before he was popular famous because of this book before Bowling Alone called Making Democracy Work, which is kind of like the like saga prequel of Bowling Alone. And what it was he was just an ordinary political scientist, like doing boring studies that no one, I nothing against it, but studies only academics read, and that were very important to academics, but not crossing through to a popular audience. And he happened upon this perfect political science experiment, which was that in the 70s, Italy broke up from a centralized government into states. Basically, they had regions, and the constitutional change resulted in all the regions getting the same structure of regional government. It's as if, America was only centralized and then one day there's states. And he said, well, that's a perfect natural political science experiment because I can test what governments succeed and what governments fail. So he first tested, how do you determine government success? And he found very rigorous correlations between all the measures of success. Like, were they actually able to do what they said? Did they have a stable government? Were the people happy? Did, he did studies as meticulous as he'd send them a request for a reimbursement for something because Italy had public health care. And so he'd say, I was injured abroad. Will you reimburse me? Which is just a story of how good other countries' healthcare are. You could get injured abroad and your government would reimburse you for the medical bill. And time, how fast the governments would get back. And, Emilia Romagna was the best at everything. And Calabria and Basilicata was the worst at everything. And it was kind of linear across that. And then he tested what correlated with, success. And he found that the most rigorous correlation, the 0.91 of whatever the, out of one, was not economics, not urbanism, not, polarization. It was civic culture. The amount of people that trusted each other, the amount of people that were part of soccer leagues and bocce clubs and singing groups, the amount of people that read the newspaper, the amount of people that said, I get together with friends and most people can be trusted. That was what correlated with it. And that kind of set off this wave of treating civic culture as important to politics in the political science literature. And so when he came to America, he's like, oh, I wonder how our civic culture is doing. And that led to the Bowling Alone discovery that our civic culture is not doing well.
Yeah. No, and there's so much wonderful data and explanation of how the data makes the argument over a long period of time, right? Years of research and different times in which the reception of this argument is being debated and so forth. And I want to return to that and to the kind of nuance of the argument. For example, the idea that if you don't have weak institutions, but you have strong civic associations, that can work, but not vice versa. It doesn't matter if you have good institutions if you don't have, the kind of social infrastructure and the social capital. And so we can dig into those kinds of things. But I want to return, and, Robert Putnam, famous scholar here, but you call him Bob for a reason, right? He was your teacher and he is your friend. And so I think that's so important in a documentary about community and belonging and relationships. Maybe talk a bit about, your relationship.
I recently discovered, I was talking to an education expert, and there is a method of learning called relational learning, where a learner just gets really into the person themselves that is teaching the idea. And I got diagnosed as like a relational learner. I just become obsessed with the philosopher I'm into, and if I don't like the person, I don't want to learn anything from them. And this isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's how I learn. And so I, took this class. He had a seminar called Community in America. And basically I was a political science major in college, and political science is this like horribly cold, at the peak of when I was there, which was like late 2000s, it's just totally quantitative. It's everyone debating presidential system versus parliamentary system. It's like people talking about the genius of different constitutional clauses. And I wanted like nothing to do with that. I wanted the total opposite of the softy political science, which was the political science of like neighborhoods and, community organizing and things like that. And he was kind of the big person on that end of the spectrum. And so I took this Community in America class, and it has haunted me ever since. It's basically like one of those classes that never leaves you, where he basically, and I say this in the movie, he's saying, everyone's going to tell you pay attention to the president of the United States, but I'm going to tell you pay attention to how the presidents of our civic clubs are doing. And, that lens I just took with me for the rest of my life. And I just take the community lens and look at everything. You can look at a megachurch and you can look at it theologically, or you can look at it and say, that's 16,000 people meeting in exurban Ohio who are all in a social network together. You can look at, an institution and say it's not doing well because of funding, or it's not doing well because of specific institutional design, but it also could be that it's something about how the civic culture was created in that institution. And this has really interesting cross-cutting ideological stuff. So sometimes, and we show it in the movie, we have this little 2 minutes in the movie where we do a little what do you think of community to a far right guy and to a centrist and then to a lefty. And, the far right guy goes, oh, I love community because it means no government. And the centrist goes, I love community because it's a way that I can have a happy applause line at a speech without kind of doing a hard decision of a trade-off. But then, Bob has a line in the movie where he says, and Bob, it's hard to tell where he falls. He has a line in the movie where he goes, if you have crime in your neighborhood, the social capital literature says if you had to choose between 10% more cops on the beat or 10% more neighbors knowing each other's first names, it is so clear in the social capital literature to choose the latter. That is doing so much more work than the brute force of some bureaucratic institution. And that sounds anarchist, basically. It's like do mutual aid or something. You sound like some collective issuing a statement. And but then it cuts a weird other way where the next line is he goes, if you have a school and you want 10% more funding or 10% more parents involved, the social capital literature says you get more bang for your buck with 10% more parents involved. And then that makes us feel weird. So it's just a really interesting cross-cutting ideology.
We're going to co-opt it for the left, Pete. We're going to totally co-opt it for the left. Because I have an explanation. You tell me if you like my explanation for why it appeals to everyone and yet it's still more leftist than the others. And this is my thought. The question arises, what is the chicken and the egg origin of what makes for strong social capital and for strong social networks? And what gives parents the ability, the conditions? And I think Eddie Glaude and maybe others in the film talk about this a little bit. What conditions give rise to these strong associations and to the joining kind of inclination, ability, reality? And I would say that for a leftist, right, if you strip away kind of like at the material conditions level, if you strip away the ability for people to survive or thrive materially, or conversely, if you provide the ability to have a living wage and healthcare and housing and all these things, then of course people are more able, inclined, and have opportunity to join and extend themselves beyond just their kind of navel-gazing selves. There's other things, of course, TV and all these other things that we can dig into, but like, broadly speaking, it's very nice to say that giving more money to school won't help if the parents aren't involved. But, if you control for other things, the household income does matter quite a bit. Like, for example, right? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I totally agree. And, one of the protagonists of the movie is Northern Italy. And Northern Italy is like the major regions that are the heroes of the movie of Northern Italy are run by lefties and have this strong lefty history. And when you start thinking really there's a path towards more and deeper communitarianism taken seriously walks you down a path from like at the beginning, it's like we should all volunteer more and 1,000 points of light. You start with George H.W. Bush, but you walk down the path and it eventually is like, your whole housing system should be designed around community. We should have cooperatives because they integrate us more. We should have a social caring system where we have participatory care. And there are actually, co-ops in Northern Italy where, the community, the patients' relatives, the government, and the nonprofits, like community organizations that all run a hospital together or something. And it like sounds like a lefty utopia. And that they do that because they say the goal, like one of our metrics is not just the cost benefit libertarian neoliberal answer, but it's also not just the like liberal outcomes answer. It's not just like how many people did you heal? It says in everything we do, we need to also measure, is it building community or not? And even if it involves getting to the outcomes that you want slower for the sake of it contributing to community, they take it because that's a metric that they take seriously. And I think it'll walk us towards that level of acting. And you can see it in like really clear examples of major progressive projects. We have like the 4-day work week, I think is like one of the grand communitarian projects of our time, because what are you going to do with that extra day? It's going to be care. I don't think people are going to be playing video games with that. I think they're going to be doing care work and community work, or play video games with friends to get connected with their friends more.
Yeah,
this is my like traditionalist, opinion. Like we need to return to LAN parties, man. We need to have people playing video games together in this same location.
Yes, Halo together.
Yes, God, I remember doing that. You'd hook like 4 different Xboxes together and have all the jocks and nerds fight each other. Okay, I won't get down that rabbit hole too much. I honestly believe this could be like revolutionary in terms of American politics, or at least like strongly positive. But like, you sort of get into this in the film a little bit, but do you have strong opinions about causes? Like, you basically have from the 1950s to, present day, like a sort of straight line decline on almost every aspect of sort of civic infrastructure of like the way that people come together, whether it's religion, whether it's clubs, you name it. There's a number of hypotheses that you could sort of throw out. You have like sort of, inequality. There's, the internet, phones, social media. You've got the decline of unions, the decline of religion in general, and neoliberalism, which is, of course, related to the union aspect. You have the built environment changing, though, of course, that was sort of like by the 1950s, that was already sort of completed, but it's like a much more hostile form to like interacting with people by the sort of 1960s. And then you have like the pandemic. I don't know. Is it sort of, do one of those stand out, or is it all of them together?
You know, when Bob wrote Bowling Alone, he had two culprits. One was television, and he had like a lot of stuff showing that like a lot of the reasons we did Community was it was a way to entertain ourselves. And then suddenly if we have this amazing theater production in our house all the time, you know, it becomes more interesting than going to the Rotary Club. The other, he said, which isn't really a cause, but it's like a really interesting clue, is he called it generational change. And we didn't get into that in the movie, but he has a whole section in Bowling Alone on this, which is the generation that were joiners back then are still joiners today in their 90s, and each successive generation were less and less joiners. And so it's not like some other things, like, you know, there are other things where everyone is declining at the same time, but this is like every gen more and more. So there's something about generational transfer that's like in there, according to his Bowling Alone stuff. He's now gotten a really fuzzy and kind of you know, disowned a bit. You know, he's gotten a little fuzzier on saying, I don't want to say it's TV. I don't want to say it's generational change. And he has this answer that I kind of agree with and have a little bit more of a lefty way of putting, which is he just says there is a multi-institutional, ideological, institutional, moral and cultural shift that all goes all at once. And that sounds like a cop-out answer, but, you know, basically, you know, our ideologies and our institutions are in a dance with each other. You know, we have new ideologies that arrive, and then they create institutions that fit that ideology. And then when those institutions are created, or the alternate institutions are destroyed, you know, it supports the ideology. And basically, like, individualism starts as this trickle that might even start as this good cause. Like, there's, you know, he points to in the 50s, there's all these books on conformity and the fear of conformity, and like, you know, great books that we're probably inspired by about the creepiness of how, you know, how communal we were, and there are all these amazing, you know, rights causes that come out of like, oh my gosh, this thing that we all have to conform to is totally oppressive and totally hierarchical. And so you have some good causes, but then, you know, there's all this writing in intellectual history about how the rights movements were hijacked by the right. And suddenly you have like Reagan sounding like a hippie of do your own thing. And then you have, you know, the California ideology and, you know, Silicon Valley building things in an individualist mindset, and the like communitarian counterculture of Silicon Valley gets wiped out by the corporatism of Silicon Valley. And then suddenly ads are starting to appeal to your individualism instead of your conformity. And then suddenly presidential speeches start sounding less like Kennedy and start sounding more like your rights to do whatever you want. And then suddenly both parties have their own thing of this. And then suddenly you forget. And, you know, it sounds like I'm just doing random stuff, but it's all basically like, this is like hegemony. It slowly grows of different ideologies, different cultures. And then it reaches a high point, and you've even forgotten the other way of being. Like, one of the things that we're trying to get across, and I think like DSA people and union organizers are trying to get across, is like finding that tiny ember of a cultural memory of like living for something bigger than yourself, or like politics can be about, you know, not just like fulfilling your hyper individualist needs together as like some deal you make with other people, but actually about, you know, transforming yourself in something larger than yourself. That is so dead, and it's like such a tiny counterculture, and we need to blow on that and like spread that fire. So we have, and then this is the hopeful story, a trickle of ideologies and institutions that are that alternative that can slowly over time build up our counter hegemony, that hopefully by 2070 people forget that, you know, hey, did you know libertarians were on the cover of like Newsweek as like the heroes of everything, and ads used to say like have it your own way instead of saying like, you know, it's good to help each other out or something. And that doesn't mean return to the old conformity. It means in our time, with our knowledge of justice movements and rights movements we had, can we bake something that fits our time and our knowledge and our sense of justice that's a little more communal? I don't know. What do you all think about that?
It's the dialectic, baby. Like, you know, it's moving forward. It's, you know, what you said too, reminds me of our buddy Harvey J.K., who is really dedicated to reclaiming our history, our radical history, for the purpose of using cultural memory to advance, a radical future where true freedom, true community, true justice is pursued. And the agency is given to those today to draw on the past for inspiration, for strategy, for the meaning of terms like freedom and justice and community. And I think your project fits in so well with that. It fits in so well with what you wrote in Committed, which, by the way, our fans loved that book, loved so much. We've had so many guests, from Corey Robin to Astor Taylor to Greg Grandin to you name it, and you are up there with the most referenced books.
It's an honor. All my heroes.
Just really, just wonderful people, wonderful books. But to your point, I think the movement forward needs to reclaim the history that you're diving into, to reappropriate leftist understandings of these concepts, and to fight on this contested ground of what it means to have community and sustain community, what it means to be free, and to have an active kind of citizenship where, if you don't want to be ruled and dominated by those with concentrated power and wealth, whether politically or economically, you need to kind of take back the agency and the decision making and get involved. And that doesn't have to mean formally in government. There's so many ways to be involved, and that's something that can sustain so many different projects that together are actually bringing democracy back. Kind of like Astor Taylor's book title, which is amazing. Democracy may not exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone.
What a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Like everyone always says when something horrible happens, they always say, well, what can I do as an individual? And I've got an answer. Nothing. Because people want to say there is a lot you could do as an individual, but the answer is no. You have to join something. You have to work with other people. There is some, I don't want to be too extreme, like being brave and being a courageous whistleblower and, given what you can is important, but eventually we need, I really love this Ralph Nader point. He says all change happens with 51% support and 1% working. By which he means, okay, we got how many people do we have in America now? 400 million people?
330.
What?
330 million.
Oh, 330. Okay, so we need 170 million people agreeing with us. Like, you can't just have your crazy 1% that believes something, and we need 170 million to agree with us. And there's a lot of great things that if we went with what a majority of people agreed on, we'd be a much better country. But then we need about 3.3 million Americans doing the work, like 10 hours a week, basically. And, my whole theory of change, my silver bullet is, if we could get those 3.3 million doing the work, that's how all change has happened. And and if we can just get the muscles, and we've had that before with these major causes, abolition and civil rights and women's suffrage and the labor movement, all those wins were only like 33% of the country in unions, a third of the country in unions.
And that's the other piece. We haven't mentioned it, but we talked about the decline of social capital and the decline of participation in clubs and unions and all these things. But as Professor Putnam points out in the documentary, he forgot for a moment the other side, which is, beforehand, it wasn't like a static thing. There was this increase and this long trajectory the other way in joining different associations. And for me, that maps onto social democracy and the decline is neoliberalism, right? Like there's a reason those lines match up with the decades they do, right?
Totally. And this is what people like Jane McAlevey talk about, is you can she's some, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she's sometimes like, it's nice to pass the PRO Act. It's nice to repeal right to work in your state. But in the end, we literally need people joining these unions and being strike ready, and we can't just rely, I'm a progressive wonk by day, and I love all of our wonky work. I love, what we all write about, but, in the end, we need people who are ready to be the muscle of all these causes, and that looks like Thursday night meetings. It looks like a really undramatic thing, and and it looks like and it can't be like finger waggy, the Thursday night meetings. It has to be a transformation. I'm going to sound really Catholic now, but like it has to be like I'm sounding like one of these
Absolutely.
spiritual priest homilies. It has to be a transformation of the heart. Like you need to have a conversion of the heart, and
Absolutely.
We opened the movie with these guys at the Oddfellows Lodge in Waxahachie, Texas, and we made him, he rolled up his sleeve, and he has a tattoo that says FL&T on it, which is friendship, love, and truth, which is the creed of the Oddfellows. And he inked it on his body because it has crawled into his heart, the idea that his job on this earth is to be friendly, be loving, and be truthful, because it's a religious, weird, strange, spiritual experience to be part of the Oddfellows. And we need to really feel that to get us to go to those Thursday meetings. And that's just using a muscle that is just we're not trained with in our hyper individualist time. I don't know, but I'm interested in hearing all your thoughts.
This is why the left it has to be different from just the liberal individualist model of rights and kind of, you relate to the state protecting you from things and its negative liberty. I mean, the whole idea of democracy and smaller republicanism and of virtue ethics, any number of things understand that the spirit of the regime or of the polity is Plato, a reflection of and symbiotic with the development of the soul and the individual, is brought up, as Astor Taylor says, you're brought up by the city or by your community, and that shapes you. And so like the left has to embrace this idea that character, excellence, arete in ancient Greek, like who we are, our way of being, which is interior as much as it's outwardly expressed, right, has to be the focus. And if we ignore that, we're missing a huge piece of it, right?
I just, my response to what you're saying is amen. I totally agree. Nothing to add. No notes.
Yeah.
Right on.
I wonder, Putnam has the sundry explanations, but I feel like the much more the more recent stuff maybe is almost more important. You talk in the film about how he wrote this book in the 90s about how like civic infrastructure has been declining, and then after he wrote that book and it got a ton of attention, he's being like feted by President Clinton and all of these like important institutions. It had no effect at all in terms of reversing the decline. It kept going, and in fact, it probably accelerated. I was looking at specifically some statistics on friendship. So like teenagers who meet with friends almost every day. That was 50% of teenagers in 1995. It was 40% in 2010. It's 25% today, according to this statistic. The men with no close friends in 1990 were 3%. Today it's 15%. Women 2% in 1990, 10% today. So you have this like,
and the other side of that graph. Can I just add a quick thing?
Yeah.
The other fun thing is like the amount of people with 10 plus friends in the 1990s was like huge. And it's like, it wasn't just that people had one or two friends. It was like people had a lot of friends.
But Pete, these days you can have thousands of followers you don't know on Twitter, and you can have, all these social media quote unquote friends that you've never met. And isn't that a replacement? Come on.
Yes.
Well, I think that suggests one of the things that's happening here is that social media is giving you this sort of like
simulated experience,
fake a version of what.
Which is weird, Brian, because we met on Twitter. So there's also a component there that complicates it, because these tools or networks often can lead to real relationships, right?
Right. Yeah. But the key is like the real relationship stuff to actually move away from the online interaction to talking to people face to face. And that, you were mentioning before how television maybe, you know, as far as entertainment, it's like people are bored, they'll go to the, you know, Rotary Club or whatever. Now you have a much more specific, you know, like you can have a sort of friend in the form of a like Twitch streamer who sort of appears to be your friend despite you not actually having a meaningful relationship with, you know, him.
What do they call it? Parasocial relationships?
Yeah,
is
right.
That what kids say?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right thing. But people crave, I think, actual legit interaction. And I think on some level people realize that this sort of sugar high version of actual interaction with other people is not the same thing. It isn't the real McCoy. You know, it's like a sex doll versus the real thing. Plus,
he's not speaking from experience, folks. He's just saying he imagines that that's the case. We're just going to assume, use your imagination. But also, Ryan, wouldn't you say that like DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, right? That's a legit thing to join. But like the Kiwanis Club doesn't have members flaming each other on Twitter and like tearing each other apart. So like maybe that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Too.
You know, it's interesting. I've been trying to say, you know, there's this like thing in the law that like property is a bundle of sticks because no one can like define what property is. So they just say it's like 15 different things. And, I like saying like community is a bundle of sticks. So like, what does community do for you? Or do for society, you know, and I can just list off like 7 now. It's like, it's a way to transfer information. It's a way to have someone read your facial expressions and show empathy. It's a way to bring you soup when you're sick. It's a way to check you when you're not following the cultural norms. It's a way to encourage you and reward you when you are following the cultural norms. It's a way to transform you when you have a deep friendship of loyalty and with someone who's different, and slowly over time you learn how to be different and be transformed by it. It's a type of person that invites you to come to something, you know. I could go on and on. It's someone who hangs out with you and goes on a hike with you. You know, it's all these things. It's someone who helps you talk about, you know, trouble you're having in your family and lets you let off steam, thus putting less pressure on your girlfriend to hear all of your problems. So that it's not just them hearing all of men's problems, but actually there's other friends that can hear the problems too. So you're not burdening this. There's all these things community is. And internet community or parasocial interaction does do some of the sticks, you know, and you know, but it doesn't do all of them, and it doesn't do really major ones. And it doesn't do really major ones for you as an individual, like bring you soup when you're sick, but it also doesn't do really major ones for democracy, like really transform you or make you learn something new, or, you know, show up together somewhere where there's a shared vulnerability. Like, you know, I might be vulnerable listening to Felix Biederman, but Felix Biederman isn't vulnerable to me, you know? And so that's like a deep human thing about shared vulnerability.
I'm not sure he's vulnerable to anyone. To be frank, that's...
I was just sharing my parasocial relationships or whatever. And it's funny because it's been around, you know, just a little funny tidbit, you know, Bob writes about parasocial relationships on like TV, like the Today Show. The designers of the Today Show wanted you to have the banter before the segments is the key to the Today Show, because it's like, oh, how was your morning, Matt? Katie, it was great. I was this. Okay, up first we have Brad Pitt or something. You know, that banter made you feel like they were at your breakfast table. And
damn it, Ryan, we've got to do more of that. We've got to reveal our personal lives.
That's what
we
good
have
podcasts are. You know, and it's funny,
Yep.
like I noticed with Rachel Maddow, she does this, like she's like a parasocial genius, because like she started to do this really postmodern thing where she goes, you know, we were so stressed writing our A block today. And so like my mom and her friends know all about A blocks and B blocks and cable news because she has like let you in to her like personal experience of being in 30 Rock planning the show. And that's what makes you like want to come back every day, because that's what a friend does, instead of just going right into the story.
I mean, that is why the TV like causation that Bob talked about did make some sense. This was a replacement. Like you felt like you're part of the soap opera you were watching or the news anchor. Like that was your relationship in a way. It wasn't just the entertainment. It wasn't just the entertainment bit. It was like, I have a routinized relationship with the same people. I look at them on the screen and I feel connected to these same people doing the same kind of thing over and over again.
Yeah. And people would write letters like, why did you kill off the sitcom character? And they'd cry, and nothing against them. That's normal. This is what we do when a friend dies. But, and it shows how deep it's gotten inside of you, but it's not the same, and we just have to, one of the things I like about Bob is people brush aside this thing as curmudgeonly or nostalgic, but we actually have the data. It's like we are joining less. We are unhappier because of it. Things work worse because of it. And again, doesn't mean we have to go back. It just means we have to go forward towards what community will look like now. And, it's been wonderful showing the film because people come up to me after the film and they tell me about their clubs. And it doesn't,
Awesome.
Sometimes it's people who rejoin the Oddfellows Lodge, and we were happy to show that in the movie. But, a kid comes up to me after our showing in Austin. He goes, I started a queer skate collective. We meet every Thursday at the skate park. We're all the outcasts of Austin, and we teach each other to skate, and we're really supportive of the skating, but it's not. And I was like, I know what you're going to say next. It's not about the skating. It's about the community.
Yeah.
And that is what we want it to look like, a queer skate collective, not Robert's Rules of Order at the Kiwanis Club. Except that's also, if you want to reinvent the Kiwanis Club, that's cool too. I don't want to diss the people that are holding out on those old orgs.
And that's important to the point you in the film, I think, are making. It's not, obviously important to rebuild union power. Obviously, there are certain really clearly political associations that really matter. But also, let your freak flag fly. Pluralism of groups and interests, and you don't even necessarily have to share interests to join an association. There could be something especially interesting about joining something where you don't know these people or share anything in common with them. There was the bowling example, actually, right? That what was the person you interviewed talking about? She's like, I actually like that. These are all strangers that I'm interacting with, and I kind of am learning something by having to relate to people that are so different or something.
Yeah, it's great. They have this amazing model. Half the season, they have 2 seasons a year. One season is you bring your friends and make your own team and play in the league. But to sign up for that, you have to participate in the other season, which is they randomly assign you to a team, and then you have to get to know other people in the league. And, they've pulled off a miracle in social science work, which is a cross-class community is harder than any other, I think, where they said, he said there are it's in Portland, Maine. He goes, we got surgeons and lumberjacks and truck drivers and coders, in Portland hipsters on these bowling teams getting to know each other. And that's just we have so much class segregation in this country. It's that is there should be an award every year for people who pull off bridging organizations that really authentically have people meet, not in the nonprofit industrial complex where it's the Ford Foundation has funded these people visiting the other side, but actually organically meeting in a nice thing, and so it's amazing. And we just need 1,000 experiments on how to do that.
That reminds me, Pete, for those who don't know, it's so, I've been teaching Bowling Alone for so long, I forgot. We didn't explain what the title refers to. Can you get into what Bowling Alone means?
I think part of its virality was just that the title was so good, which is basically Bob had started discovering all these declines in all these civic groups, PTAs, League of Women Voters, Kiwanis, things like that. And he wanted to write it up. And right before he was about to write it up, he meets this bowling magnate. We didn't get into it that much, because he was the dean at the time, and so he needed to do fundraising for the school, for the Kennedy School, and so he was meeting the rich people of Boston, and one of them was a bowling alley magnate, and he goes, "How's business?" And the bowling alley magnate goes, "We have more people coming into bowl than ever, but all of our money is in bowling leagues, and no one's joining the leagues, and the bowling leagues eat more and drink more, and our money is in the refreshments and the food, not in the balls and the shoes. And so it doesn't matter that all these people are bowling, because when they're bowling alone, my industry's suffering." And so he goes, "Oh my gosh, they're bowling alone." And then that's kind of the message. And I think it has this nice dual message because it's saying it's not that we're not doing the activities. It's like we're doing the activities alone. And I made a reference in one part of the film on religion where at the moment when religion's declining, they do polls on if you believe in God. And the polls show just as like roughly, there's a little bit of decline from like 96% to 90%. But, we still have like huge numbers of believing in God, but less than 50% of people are members of a congregation. So we're believing alone. And it's like all these things, it's not that we've given up on activities. It's just we're giving up on, we're not doing the land parties. We're talking with people all across the country, So that's the origin of the film.
I wonder though, he also noted a dramatic shift in trust in government, a decline from questions like, do you, I don't know, think the government, I don't know if it was, do you think the government's doing a good job or do you trust them? Something like that. And it went from 75%. Do they have
your best interest in mind or something?
Yeah, that those kind of questions. It went from 75% to 25%. But it occurs to me if you don't have people who are involved in associations or community generally, which is a place where you learn how to relate and think of other people's interests and you form all of these virtues, how good are your institutions going to be when the people in them haven't been, right? So there's probably a relationship.
Get a critique about that graph we've got in touring the movie where people say, aha, I got you. You're blaming us for not trusting in government. Like the government's screwing us over, read Noam Chomsky or something, or Ralph Nader or something. Like they don't have our best interests. We're just coming to awareness of it. And I go, I agree, but the way that institutions thrive is by joining. So the watchdogs that, that Ralph Nader is telling people to form congressional watchdog groups and, have every sector have a public interest watchdog group. That needs you to join. Code Pink wants more members to fight the imperial state. We're not going to the goal of making the government not just trust in government, but making the government trustworthy is also a thing that requires joining because, there's also a bureaucratic civic culture. If, we don't have a lively public spirited bureaucracy where there's a revolving door and people think that's normal and people don't, have the Kennedy hunky-dory sense that when they're working in government, they're working for the people, when they feel like it's just for themselves and we don't have that spirit, that's going to make a worse government too. So, it all is connected.
Talk a little bit about the pandemic. You kind of reference this a little bit obliquely, but I think it's the almost the strongest possible evidence for your argument that you had this period of roughly 6 months to a year where social life was radically disrupted. People couldn't meet in person for a long time, and it fucked everything up. You had, you just look across the board, crime, traffic violations, and I just look outside my door in Philadelphia and I live a block away from a school and people, it's actually come back down a little bit, it seems to me, but for a solid 6 months to a year, people just run the red light right next to the school. Just straight up, solid red, just run right through it, sometimes at high speed. And, that sort of antisocial behavior, just blatantly antisocial behavior didn't happen in the same way before the pandemic. And, can you speak to the extent to which having a political community relies on these sort of connections and people being sort of inculcated in a kind of belief that even on, maybe we're not Norwegians, but there are certain standards where you at least don't fucking run the red light right next to the school to run over the kindergartners or whatever,
Yeah,
you should run the red light next to Wharton and run over the Wharton grad, but not the kindergarten.
No comment. Parody. There's a lot of connections between the pandemic and the social capital story. So just as prequel to like the connection to how it's caused things to be bad, the pandemic is partially caused by bowling alone. We have a study from Christos Makritis and Carrie Wu, two sociologists, who studied the correlation between places that had high social capital and the spread of the pandemic. Many people have this like vulgar sense where they're like, wouldn't it spread more in high community areas because they're all meeting up? But it actually doesn't work that way. When you have high community areas, more people listen to, did pro-social things like wear masks and get vaccines and trust institutions, and feel like things were trustworthy to, follow the protocol and not spread the disease. So, the spread was, it's like they have some number, like going from the bottom 25% of social capital to the top 25% of social capital counties will save X number of lives in the pandemic. So, we have hard stuff there. But then what does the pandemic cause? We're bowling alone before the pandemic, and suddenly all these in-person meetings are like gone, and many of them aren't coming back. It was like a total decimation of civic life in America. And it's not, you lose the thread of the routine. Like so many of these orgs are just based on the routine of every Thursday night or every first Friday. And it's just really hard to get it started again, let alone having the buildings where they're meeting. Those buildings are shutting down and things like that because they couldn't pay the rent, or let alone the bars and all these informal ways that you connect. And then Bob has studies on, and this is one of my favorite ones, on the connection between social capital and kind of like interpersonal friendliness. Like in low social capital areas, people report flicking off people while driving more. In low social capital areas, more people report saying, I could beat someone in a fight. It's one of my favorite questions they ask in like standard social surveys. Could you beat someone in the fight? It's correlated with like being a more violent person. Basically, if you think you can beat someone and like say that proudly, like those who answer definitely, it's in low social capital areas where more people answer definitely. And what this comes down to, what's the causal mechanism of this like causation or correlation? It's I really believe in this Roberto Unger quote where he says, the Brazilian philosopher that I'm obsessed with, he says, our ideals are nailed to the cross of our institutions, by which he means anything you want has to be baked into an institution. No one just starts doing something because you think it's a good idea and you put it on a bumper sticker. So all these like bumper stickers that are like, be kind, or like, can't you be a nice person? Or, this is water, wake up and, treat people better. That doesn't happen because you finger wag at people to be nice. It happens because it's a literal muscle that's built by interacting with people in shared missions where you have to interact with people. And then you learn the muscle, the art, the craft, the virtue of being a good person. And so you lose the civic infrastructure, and there's no amount of finger wagging or commercials about being kind that are going to make you kind. The way we become kind is practicing kindness by having a hard meeting with someone who's different than you, and you have to get the potluck ready anyway and work together, and you learn a little bit about empathy and learn a little bit about patience. And it's just like kindergarten, except like we have to do it as adults. And if you're going to lose that infrastructure, you're going to get worse at it, and you're going to run over more people while driving. I don't know. Do you agree? Do you believe in that? Does that resonate?
No, it absolutely does. I mean, one thing about me in particular is that, I've been working from home since long before the pandemic hit, since 2014. But even prior to that, I'd spent, when I was in the Peace Corps in South Africa, there was a teacher's strike, and I spent like over a month completely by myself, didn't talk to anybody for about 5 weeks. And I knew how not interacting with anybody, it fucks you up. It turns you weird. There are a lot of people who had to learn how to sort of manage the social aspect of working from home, I think when the pandemic hit, there's lots of parts about working from home that are beneficial. It's like you save on commuting costs and time. You could save on the office space and rent and whatnot. But I think it's possible to understate how important the sort of social aspect of having an office is, and just more broadly than that, like interacting with others. I definitely feel that crisis of loneliness myself. Like it's hard to make friends nowadays, and if you have a work from home job, it can be very easy, in a mechanical sense, to just kind of never leave your house, or only leave your house to sort of like walk around the block or whatever. And I think that if you kind of give into it is profoundly unhealthy. And, I think that people, they crave connection, and they crave community. And we've just sort of systematically destroyed all of those, the previous.
Yeah, I just want to be careful to like distinguish between, by the way, Ryan is now taking email requests to be his friend. He's open to friendship with anyone. Please email us at leftanchorpodcast@gmail.com. Anyway, but I also want to distinguish between between the kind of isolation and loneliness that preceded the pandemic, that was born from like antisocial behavior that like whether it's in like the incel community, or I'm not necessarily blaming people that have no friends, but like that is born of the kind of individualistic conditions that have been created in so many different ways, that have alienated people at their workplace, that have alienated people in any number of ways. I mean, even Kurt Vonnegut, famous lefty socialist, right, talks about the two biggest killers, loneliness and boredom, right? And your documentary does a great job to talk about how loneliness is social, political, economic. It's not just individual, right? It is so important, right, in many ways. But like the pandemic is an example of these terrible things happening because of a public health crisis, and the failures of public health responses, and the failures of a kind of solidaristic communal response in so many ways, in so many places. And I don't want to forget like the kind of mutual aid that popped up in the face of the pandemic, the kind of, as you say, Pete, lessened death and lessened harm in those places and spaces where people had those networks and had the communal bonds formed. And then last but not least, there is also a kind of ableism angle here, where like, because of Zoom and because of the ways that there was like a need to move things virtual, there was a good thing, I think, that came from accessibility and meetings that were just default in person. And there is a good thing about hugging and embodied kind of like, situations that are necessary for us. But like so many things also now are accessible to more people because it's on Zoom. And so maybe if you want to talk about the complexities.
Yeah,
there.
And I had some people come up to me during the screening. It's so wonderful after you write a book or you make a movie, then you get like all these conversations afterwards that make you want to go back into the edit room, and you wish you could show it to everyone and then make a second movie. And I had some people come in, and and I get this a lot with like my localism stuff, where they say, I live in suburban DC, they're like, in suburban DC, it's very nice to care about your hometown, where it's nice to live in your hometown. You should live in my hometown, where everyone bullied me. I was totally isolated. I was oppressed, basically, and getting out of it. And getting out of it is what some people say to the localism stuff. Like, why are you telling everyone to move to their hometowns? For the community stuff, they say, having internet friends saved my life, and having even parasocial internet friends saved my life, just like listening to a podcast where I felt heard. And so I really don't want this to be like internet bad, non-internet good. I think it's more, and I really don't want this to be a finger waggy thing about like, you should join, I think it's kind of a collective project of rebuilding the civic infrastructure to give people the options, and to have more, on-ramps to community, so that when you're ready to have it, you can get more of that bundle of sticks that comes with community. And, and it might be, Bob talks about alloys, where he says like the best internet communities are the ones that are a mix of online and in person. And he says actually in-person groups that have an online component end up meeting more because they have their text thread that makes someone, because they have a text thread, which they didn't have before, or a DM group, someone says, who wants to go to the Wizards game? I got extra tickets, to the text thread, which never would have happened before with your formal Thursday meetings. And then you end up meeting more. And so my encouragement with all these folks is, have your internet friends, but, save up some money and go have your annual retreat somewhere, with your internet friends, and go meet up and see what joy comes from that. And for those who are benefiting from not being able to meet in person, try to get more of that bundle of sticks by having, being vulnerable on Zoom with each other, making it a deeper and deeper community in the way that you can. Don't let it just stay on the surface, and good things will come from that. And we literally need it to form the political groups that are going to heal this country before we're all destroyed by the political groups that are destroying our country.
Artificial intelligence is in the news lately, right? Like ChatGPT and all this stuff. And some people are even forming parasocial relationships with their little AI responses and so forth. What do you see with the challenges ahead? Because maybe we can connect this to, Eddie Glaude at the end has this great point. And so do you about, I think Glaude says, if the polis is going to be saved, we have to imagine being together differently. And I think, you talk about, Pete, community is what you get when you do what you love together. So this idea of imagining new ways of being together, new understandings of community, maybe talk about that hopeful call to action and what it means in the face of, again, advancing technologies and things which we might think have something to do with the downward trend over the many decades.
Yeah, I don't have like a good take on AI. I think it's freaking me out. I'm getting like totally freaked out. Not on like just on a purpose level. I'm less thinking about like, oh, it's going to escape and enslave us or something. Like I'm more just like, is this the final like death knell of anyone feeling like we have purpose, and is the like final thing that's having us connect to the gears of reality going to finally go loose and we're going to all like float in the ocean of meaninglessness? So that is like, I'm scared. I like have a theological.
Well, is it because of the transformation thing you're talking about? Like the kind of virtue ethics Aristotelian sense of like, you develop relationally your own excellences and you do your own, whether it's spiritual or other types of virtues that make you who you are and what you care about and who you are and what you do. Like all of that is being maybe threatened by a substitute thing.
Yeah, it's like I'm a big believer in the lumping together of what we do and what we love and who we're in a relationship with and the place we're in, all are wrapped up in a rope together, and you're playing with fire anytime you take out one string of it. And I don't want to be like a full-on Burkean saying like never pull out a string, but when something's coming and it's going to cut like 7 of those strings, make you, faster than we're going to build up the civic infrastructure. So like my only take on AI with regard to civic culture is urgent, like move fast. Like we need a democratic culture because like technology is built based on the dominant hegemonic culture, and it will be built for like hyper individualism if we don't, and like corporate control, and technocracy.
So it's less scary. It's less scary if we have that kind of solid foundation of communal association and belonging as a bulwark against the dangers. It could be maybe incorporated less dangerously.
Yeah, tech always gets subsumed in the like cultural context. You invent rocket technology in a highly communal status time, and you have the Apollo program. You have other rocket technology in a hyper individualist corporate time, and you have Elon Musk, running the whole thing. And it's, it's just like when things emerge, it's really it really matters the coincidence of like what's in charge at the time when things emerge. So that's one scary thing, but my one thing, my non-Luddite take on community is people make community with whatever is the material around you. And like, I had friends in high school and we were the 7-Eleven club and we went to 7-Eleven and got Slurpees, and 7-Eleven is like a horrible corporation that is like so less meaningful than like our peers 50 years earlier, or our equivalents 50 years earlier, going to like a locally owned thing. But we still felt a lot of meaning getting the Slurpees at the 7-Eleven and like thought it was funny. And, you know, when I met someone after one of our screenings and they said, I'm part of a soccer fan club, Pringles Club. And I go, what does that mean? And he goes, well, we have Austin FC, and that's our like football club. And we have like, we're trying to create the European soccer like fan spirit that they have in Europe and Latin America. And so we have like a big fan team, and there's like thousands of us. And so we have sub clubs inside of the fans. And I started the Pringles Club, where it's all people, we all bring Pringles and we wear Pringles and we eat Pringles and we all bring each other. And it's like funny, and we send each other Pringles, but none of that matters. What matters is they're all becoming friends. And like, I don't think that that's any less important than another thing. And it's mediated by someone picking up cultural trash, basically, like in our stupid branded hyper, you know, stupid era of like, and just trying to find love and life in it. And I think people are going to find weird things with technology and cyber stuff and weird mixes of technology and in person. And, you know, geocaching is interesting. You know, people doing TikTok hashtags to meet, you know, there are some TikTok hashtags that are resulting in weekly clubs that some people have made. And, you know, we'll see what comes of this. My one thing is, though, I really don't want it corporatized, and I really don't want it hierarchical. So like, I don't want it to be go back to the office and only have your community inside of our like hierarchical thing. And I don't want it to be all these like Silicon Valley things where every year someone's saying like, I've got an app for community where, you know,
can I say the one place you should not have community unless it's in a union is at the workplace?
Yes.
that is not your family. You have a different family, and your friends are not. That is a move by the powers that be to try to get you to work more for less.
Yeah, it's like
don't buy into that.
It's a demonic pseudo community that that happens all over the place. Like all types of hierarchy, and this is something Bob points out, all types of hierarchy make a fake pseudo community, and then they work really aggressively to break up your authentic community. Like they broke up slave communities. Yeah. They didn't want them meeting up because they knew community is power. And that's why we have union avoidance. They know community is power, and then they try to create like a pseudo demonic version of it. And so we gotta keep that in mind. Like, not all communities made equal.
But there's hope. Join or die, but there's hope.
Yes.
Yeah. Hashtag not all communities. Yeah. I think that's probably all the time we have now. Pete Davis. The movie is called, we'll link to it. I do recommend seeing it. It was a little bit of a difficult watch for me. You know, kind of struck me deep, you know, in some ways, as being like a little bit of a lonely individual myself. But it's definitely worth watching. And we'll link to it in the show notes. And we appreciate you and Bob Putnam for putting that together, and all the other folks who are involved.
Yeah. And I'll say something on that spirit, Ryan. Part of the message of the movie that I hope you can be a takeaway for viewers is you are not alone in being alone. One.
Yeah.
And two, it is not just your job to like self-help come together. We all, if you have extra, you know, if you're someone out there who has the extra bandwidth or the extra like space for friendship and civic creativity, you need to make the clubs that can get the lonely people together. You know, we need to have a building project, and we all got to work together to come together. And so no one is alone in this project of coming together
That's right.
and feeling what we're feeling right now.
Appreciate that, Pete. I'm going to invite Ryan over to my place right after this podcast. And everyone email Ryan and I invitations. We're going to join a bunch of groups.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode.